I am going to go through some slides, and we are in record mode now so that I will be able to share this with you guys as soon as it's done processing. So, the goal of the presentation is to refresh those of you that have been weed watchers on the lake so that you know what to look for when you're out on the lake, and also to train those of you who are new to weed watching so that you can join the group of folks that have been stewarding Ayers Lake for quite some time. And what I'd like to do is talk about weed watcher methods, talk about some native plants and some invasive plants that you guys should be looking for, more specifically with the context of Ayers Lake and your general area. So I just want to confirm you guys should be seeing a blue slide that says overview on it. Okay, great. All right. So then the first topic is why maintain a weed watcher program? This is a really proactive approach, and I can't tell you enough that most lakes that have weed watcher programs find infestations when they're new and very small. Lakes that don't have a weed watcher program or that are in the program but then lapse sometimes don't see infestations. And this is actually what happened right next door on Swains Lake. They had an active weed watcher program. The lead weed watcher retired. Nobody stepped up to lead, and nobody was ultimately looking for milfoil or other invasives. So instead of finding a patch near the boat launch first, early before it spread, they ended up with close to 80 acres of milfoil in Swains Lake, which is pretty dramatic. And it took a lot of management to reduce that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But on lakes where we have weed watcher programs, I've had volunteers that have found single stems of new infestations. And they're not botanists, they're not biologists, they're weed watchers from other backgrounds. And they just look and they look for anything new or different on their lake. So that really does make a difference to catch infestations early because we can respond quickly and manage them before they do get widespread. And when they do get widespread, we often don't use the word eradicate anymore. But when we find infestations early, then the term eradicate still has a place in the discussion. So we can facilitate a rapid response, remove the plants that are in there that are invasive, and then keep them from spreading lake wide. And the program is simple. All we ask is that volunteers go through a weed watcher training, and just once a month from May through September, we ask volunteers to look around, see if they see anything, and report it if they do. And like I said, you don't need to be an expert in biology, but you certainly are an expert in your own water body. So you guys know Ayers Lake. You swim in it, you boat on it, you fish on it, you kayak, and you'll notice those subtle differences if you do see anything that is new or different. So that's the basics of what's involved. The methods and the resources are pretty simple. We provide weed watcher kits. So for those of you who are new or who have an older kit, I'm happy to replace that or provide a kit for you. Dan, maybe we can coordinate a head count and you can let me know what you need and I'll get you some kits. The Weed Watcher Kit contains methods, which I'm going to talk about in a second. It also contains pictures of invasive species that we are concerned about, and it has fact sheets on those so you can learn more about them. And then there are some maps and other resources that are available, which I'll show you in the slideshow tonight. And the general methods, when you're on the water, you guys have you've had a weed watcher program for a number of years. So hopefully the lake is already broken out into sections. And the reason why we do that is so that people can have a piece of shoreline so that not one person feels responsible for surveying the entire water body once a month. So if you have a small section assigned to you, that's great. If you're new and you don't have a section, I'm going to suggest that you chat with Dan and obtain a section to volunteer on. So that is the first piece, is having the shoreline broken out into pieces. And then going out on the water body to do your search. You can go out in whatever you're comfortable with. I have weed watchers that use power boats, pontoon boats, canoes, kayaks, paddle boards. Some of them swim or snorkel or scuba dive their sections. Some of them use the old paddle boats. So whatever gets you out there, it doesn't matter what method you use. And when you're on the water, we ask that you scan the surface. And when you're scanning the surface, you're looking for any little pieces of plants that may be floating up. Most of the lakes that I work on that have an infestation have pieces of broken up plants drifting on the surface. Now, natives will do this too. But when you have an invasive, there is a preponderance of fragments floating around. So scan the surface, scan the bottom of the lake to see what's down and rooted, and then also look on shore because some of the invasive pieces will wash up on shore, and also some invasives grow on shore. And I'll talk about a couple of those. One of the things that I use as a giveaway when I'm approaching a water body in the morning, when I go out, or the first time that I go to it, is what's washed up near the boat launch. Because a lot of times that's a telltale sign that something has invaded the lake. So kind of look everywhere, basically. Um, when you're on the water, I broke out this map here showing you a couple of volunteers and their methods. The top one, volunteer number one, that weed watcher likes to go parallel to shore in their section. And every pass that they do, they get farther from shore. And their last pass is where it's too deep for them to actually see all the way to the bottom. The volunteer on the bottom likes to zigzag on and off shore. So it's just turning that zigzag the other way. And the whole goal of that is so that you can see as much of the bottom area of your zone as possible. And now some of you are going to have the zones where it gets deep really fast. So you have a really skinny zone close to shore. Some of you will be on the shallow portion of the lake where you might go all the way across before you don't see bottom anymore and don't lose sight of bottom. So every bit of lake is going to be a little bit different. If your section is the one that receives wind all the time, that is the place where everything will wash up and you'll have lots to look at. If you are near the outlet, that's another place where things accumulate. And the boat launch area is a good place to look. Most new infestations I find at the boat launch first. So obviously, you guys with an expanding boat launch will certainly have concerns over that, and you're going to want to keep a close eye on the boat launch area. So those are the basic methods. Some other equipment that I can recommend. I wear polarized glasses all the time. They really help cut the glare on the surface of the water. And you don't need the high-end ones. The $10 ones from the grocery store or the convenience store are perfect. And I find that the brown lenses work a little bit better for some reason in our water. The gray ones work, but I think that you can see a little better with the brown ones. And then you'll find your sweet spot. You want to be weed watching when there's enough sun to illuminate the water column. That also means that's when it's windier. So you're going to have to find a time when the wind is calmer so you can see into the water, but it's also bright enough to do your survey. So those are just some tips from someone who's always on the water doing surveys. And what are you looking for? And I'm going to show you pictures of some of these, but anything that looks new or out of place, something that wasn't there last month, last year. Now, obviously, you're going to see native plants that expand, and that's normal. But invasive plants grow a lot quicker than natives, so they'll look bigger faster. They'll spread quicker. They'll fragment more. So anything like that is what you should be looking for. And since the different weed watcher trainings that we've done over the years with your lake association and I've mostly talked about plants. but it's more than just plants these days. There's also some invasive animals to look out for, and I'll show you some pictures of those as well. So those are certainly on the rise. We've sort of slowed the rate of spread of our plants. They still spread, but not as quickly as they used to. It seems like animals are the new ones now. And animals are difficult because they have microscopic larvae and you can't see them when they're spreading. So we have crafted the clean, drain, dry messaging for our boaters. Our signage speaks to that, and we try to get boaters to wash their boats between water bodies that they go to, just to try to prevent the spread and to drain any water associated with their ballast or bait buckets or anything like that away from the water. Um, so when you're out there, if you find something, I'm going to recommend that you carefully collect a voucher specimen. Unfortunately, I can't get to every lake to ID something every time, but if you send me a photo of the species that you found, I can get back to you within minutes or hours. I always have my work phone with me and I'm always checking email. So collect a piece of whatever you're seeing and then place it on a piece of white paper towel or a piece of white paper and then arrange it so that I can see it. And then put a piece of a pen or a coin or a ruler next to it so I have scale. And then take a digital picture of it and email it to me. That is by far the best way to get a quick answer. You could also send it to me by mail. It's going to take a while by mail to get to me, and then when I'm not often in the lab because I'm in the field a lot, so it'll take me a couple more days to get to it. But email is with me 24/7, so you will get a quick response. So that's how you get a voucher specimen to me if you do find something suspicious. And a note on that, don't feel bad if you send me multiple emails with multiple pictures. I'm happy to look at plants for you. I would rather have you bombard me with photos than ignore something and not send it for ID. So please send anything that's of concern. So let's take a look at what the lake plants look like and what should be in different zones. And by zones, I mean where plants grow in the lake. And if you think about standing on your shorefront and looking out over Ayres Lake, there are different zones in the lake. In the far back here in the photo is the emergent zone, where the plants are rooted in the sediment, but most of the plants stick up above the water. As you move out a little bit deeper, you get into the water lily zone, which is the floating zone. And then a little bit deeper and mixed in underneath is the submerged zone or the underwater zone. Almost all lakes have all three zones. Sometimes they intermix, sometimes they're very discrete. It's a function of depth and the type of plants that are in your lake. So, this is what I mean by emergent, floating, and submergent when I talk about that. So, let's take a look at a series of pictures. First, I'm going to show you pictures of plants that are normal and good and nothing to worry about. And then we're going to transition into looking at some of the invasives. I am going to share these slides with you guys so you have them. I also, some years ago, created a slideshow specifically for Ayers Lake based on the plant list that we have for your lake. So somewhere, Dan, I think I sent it to you originally. It's a PDF slideshow that has colored photographs of everything that should be there, and then a whole bunch of pictures of stuff that shouldn't be there. So I'll send that again so that can get routed. Thanks, Dan, for the thumbs up. And then you'll have a couple of different resources to look at for just refreshers. So starting first with emergent plants that are native and normal. Up on the upper left is burr reed. This one is kind of a foot or two tall near the shallows. It has this little white spiky seed head. And it looks like a short cattail, I guess is the best way that I can think to describe it. Top middle is sedges. We have a lot of sedges. If you were to run your fingers over the leaves of these plants, they have three sides. So sedges have edges. So they feel triangular in shape. Top right is pipewort. This one is rooted. It usually has green, spiky, needle-like leaves on the lake bottom, And then it has little white button-like tips on it. And that's typically close to shore, but it can also grow in a couple of feet of water. Rushes, if you roll these between your fingers, they're rounded. They don't have edges to them like the sedges, and they have little brown seed heads on them. Cattails should be familiar to everybody. They're really common, and they have these big cigar-shaped and sized seed heads on them. Bottom left is pickerelweed. This one is one of the more colorful ones in our water bodies. It has a pale purple flower. I'm going to show you purple loosestrife, which is an invasive, in a couple minutes. Pickerelweed is different. It grows in the water and it's about a foot tall. It has a leaf that looks almost like a donkey ear and then a separate stalk with a pale purple flower. I'll talk about purple loosestrife when I show you a picture of that one. And then arrowhead, it has an A-shaped or arrow-shaped leaf with a little white flower. So these are all things that you could expect to see in the emergent or near shore zone of Ayres Lake. Lily pads and floating leaf plants are really common to most folks. Whitewater lily in the upper left is really common. If it doesn't have the flower, you can tell it's the white one because it's round and it has a V-shaped notch. For those of you familiar with the Pac-Man game, it sort of looks like Pac-Man, kind of the shape of it. Top middle is floating heart. This is a very small plant. It's only an inch or two across and it's shaped like little hearts. They're usually clustered together in a little rosette. Water shield on the upper right has oval shaped leaves, and this is very common. Some are green, some are yellow, some are fading to red. So you'll see that variation in color. Bottom right is yellow water lily. Big oval shaped leaves with a heart shaped base. Yellow water lily is the first lily to flower in the spring, so you usually see that one really early. And then we have a lot of pondweeds that have floating leaves on them. These are usually pretty oval. Sometimes you can see underwater leaves with them, sometimes not. So those are the really common floating leaf plants. And then this is the tricky one. These all sort of look alike if you aren't familiar with them, but then you hone in a little bit and you start to see some of the differences. These are all normal, common underwater plants or submergent plants. Top left is bladderwort. And now the bladderworts always confuse people because they look a lot like milfoil. And some tricks for that is that the leaves are sort of splitting or branching. And then if you look on the leaves, they have either blackish dots or sometimes greenish or whitish. And it's called bladders on this plant, but they're actually little bellies. This is a carnivorous plant and it eats the microscopic animals in your lake water. This little button-like tip, or not button-like tip, the little pom-pom here is the winter bud. So usually in September, October, they start to form this. The rest of the plant breaks down, and that winter bud is what grows the new plant the next year. So right now in the lake, you're probably seeing some of these winter buds with new plants emerging from them. Bladderwort is not rooted. I like to call this one the tumbleweed of lakes because it drifts. So it'll float up on the surface in big masses like tumbleweeds and then blow around the lake on windy days. I'm going to jump over to the upper right. This is also bladderwort. This is a world bladderwort, a little bit different. If you were to look at the leaves closely, they're also branched, but this one has leaves that whirl around the stem a little bit more. And the bladders are a little harder to see because they're green and they blend in. So if you just look closely at the leaves and you see little circles or structures, that is probably bladderwort. Top middle is coontail. This one often gets confused for milfoil. It has leaves that are whorled around the main stem, except they're more splitting or branching like the bladderwort is. But it can be tricky. This one, when you feel it, feels almost like a plastic aquarium plant in your hand. It's very kind of stiff and a plasticky feeling. And then it gets a little thicker as it gets up to the tip. On the middle right is water naiad. I know you guys have a lot of this one up at the end where the boat launch is proposed. I've seen this one a lot. So this one has needle-like leaves that are in little clusters along the stem. Bottom right is a pondweed species. It's robin's pondweed, and it looks like a big feather frond. We have a lot of pondweeds that are underwater that have different shapes to them. These are just some examples. Native milfoil. We do, in fact, have 6 native species of milfoil in New Hampshire. They are perfectly fine. They're well behaved. They're not invasive. This one here only grows about 6 inches tall, and it's got a nice reddish brown color to it, which is distinctive compared to the bright green of invasive milfoils. And in your Weed Watcher kits, we have photos that show a lot of these as full plants. And then on the reverse, we have cross sections so you can really see the leaves and the colors and the sizes. So that is something that will be useful. Bottom left is tape grass. This one looks like fettuccine noodles. It's a broad band of straight leaf. The little squiggly white things right here are a telltale sign in the middle of the summer. Those are the reproductive stalks of the tape grass, and they're very spirally up through the water column. And then the last one, middle left, is waterweed. You also have a lot of this in Ayres Lake. And the key with this one is we have an invasive that is a look-alike. So for your waterweed, when you pick it up and you look at it, you want to make sure that it consistently or almost consistently has leaves of 3 and whorls around the stem. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And if you count a few of them down the stem, as long as it's mostly 3, you're good. If you consistently have 4 or more in a whorl, I need to know right away because it's a potentially really bad invasive that I'll show you a picture of. So waterweed is fine. So those are your common underwater plants. And then I just want to touch on algae because it is the season. Things are already starting. The top photo, despite looking kind of clumpy and gross, is totally fine. That's filamentous green algae, and it looks a lot like cotton candy or a cloud in the sky, puffy, stringy, and all kind of billowy. So don't worry about that one. But anytime you guys see scums or flecks, anything washing up around the lake edge that looks like a bathtub ring that has a greenish or bluish color, with the exception of pollen, which we're seeing a lot of pine pollen right now. But if it doesn't look like pine pollen and it looks algal, that's something we want to know about. And certainly if the water color changes to a different weird bluish, greenish, yellowish color, that's not pollen. We definitely want to know about that. And then we'd need to look at that under a microscope to confirm what it is. And what we're worried about is cyanobacteria because cyanobacteria can produce toxins, and we just want to make sure folks are safe. So if you see anything scumming or coating the bottom other than the fluffy green stuff, we just want to know about it. We have an online form that you can submit for notification to us with some photos, and I'll share that link with you guys through Dan. So those are the algae. And now we're going to move into some of the resources that are available to you. So when I send you these slides, you can actually click on this link and go to the map. Or you can simply go into a web browser like Google or whatever you use and type in NHDES Lake Mapper. And when you do that, you're going to be brought to a site where you can go into a map, and it looks like the state of New Hampshire map, like shown here. And you can actually, zoom in. And then when you zoom in, this is Ayres Lake. You can click on that. And when you click on it, you'll get this box that pops up, and you can scroll up and down on it. That is every report or map or anything that we have on a water body. In this case, it's what we have on Ayres Lake. And if you go to the lake, and I'm sorry, this is tiny, but if you go to the Lake Trophic Survey report, we have a couple years highlighted. If you click on one of those, it takes you to our lake reports. And in those lake reports, you can find things like a depth map. So this will tell you where you should be weed watching. So for Ayers Lake, I'm going to say anywhere from 10 feet or less is the zone that you should be focusing on. And this is a great example um, for what I was mentioning, where some of you are going to live on shorelines where these depth lines are really close together, which means that the depth gets deeper very quickly. And some of you, like on the southwestern end or the northeastern end, have a lot more zone to cover because it's shallow and you can see bottom all the way across. So this gives you an idea of the zone. So when you're signing up for your zones, you want to maybe take a look at the depth map so you know what you're getting into. So that's a helpful resource. This map is a native plant map for Ayers Lake. The symbols let you know where the plants are that we identified. And then there's a key that goes to that map that tells you what the symbols are and the common name, the Latin name, and then what the relative abundance is. So is it scattered here or there? Is it sparse, meaning it's not that common? Is it common, meaning it's sort of here and there around the lake? And what the overall rating is for the lake, which is common. So this gives you a bunch of information in that table. I do want to touch on Swains Lake as a nearby water body that's had issues. So I found and confirmed milfoil in 2022. Somebody emailed me and said, I think we have milfoil. And they sent me a picture and I said, yep, that looks like milfoil. So I went out on Swains Lake and I started boating. And they told me that there was a spot down the eastern shoreline, about halfway down, where they found the patch. And even before I got out of the boat launch cove, I found a bunch of milfoil. And then I continued down shore and kept finding more. And then, sure enough, the spot they told me definitely had it. And then when I surveyed the entire water body, I did indeed find patches around most of the shoreline on the eastern half, and then a couple locations on the smaller western basin. So that is what we found for growth. The bottom map shows you the zones that we actually treated with aquatic herbicide so that we could control that. I've already been out to Swains Lake this spring and I found two plants in proximity to the boat launch. All of the rest of those dots are gone because that treatment worked really well. That doesn't mean it's gone forever, but I'm going to send divers in to remove the plants in that small location that I found them. And then we're going to keep monitoring. And we are going to keep monitoring and we're going to keep responding. And we might need to do more diving. We might need to treat again, but that's what happens when you have an infestation. You're staying on it. We have had some leaks that we've completely eradicated milfoil from. And usually if a lake is free from invasives for a few years and I don't find anything, I can delist it. It's kind of hard to delist and we don't delist a lot, but it's possible and it's happened. So we're going to keep working towards that goal, but ultimately we want to just keep milfoil densities low, especially in that boat launch area, so that Swains is not a risk to other nearby lakes like you guys. All right, let's take a look at some of the invasives. So in New Hampshire, we have about 100 water bodies that have some type of infestation. And oddly, most of those are from the middle half of the state south. For some reason, we have not documented any infestations up in the northern half of the state yet. I'm not sure why, but we have. But it's not from lack of looking, because we certainly do look up there. Most of our infestations are variable milfoil, and you can see that by all of these red dots that are here on the map. And then we also have a few other invasives like Eurasian water milfoil. The Connecticut River has a bunch of different things, so it gets a special dot. It's got 5 invasives. As we get to southern New Hampshire, we have a couple others like fanwort coming in. But your general area is mostly red dots in the state. So mostly variable milfoil in your general area. So moving on to some of your high risk species. So based on where you guys are in the state and the general chemistry of your water body, the plants that I worry about for you guys are variable milfoil, obviously because you have it near you. Hydrilla, which is the one that looks like the water weed that you guys have. I worry about that one because it is over the border from us in Maine, so it's not that far from you to the east. And then I'm putting out a general alert for water violet in New Hampshire because it is a plant that I found in Lake Winnipesaukee last year, and I've started to see it spread. And I suspect that waterfowl are spreading it. So it could be spread by boats, but also waterfowl. So I want you guys to be aware of that. And then for animals, and I'm going to again remind you animals are on the move and they're newer to most weed watcher groups. And weed watching is sort of not the appropriate term anymore. We have to kind of, I've been jokingly calling it whatever watching because I've already talked about plants and algae and now animals. So anything in the lake that looks weird or new is fair game. So for you guys, I'm going to mention Asian clam and Chinese mystery snail as species of concern. All right. So, for a bit of a refresher and to highlight those species that I listed as a concern for your group, I'm going to start with the same zones that I talked about with the natives. We're going to start with the emergent zone. So, earlier when I said look up at shore, that's because some of the invasives can be on shore. The first one is purple loosestrife. This one usually blooms in July and August. And I told you it's similar to purple loosestrife only in that it's purple. This one is onshore or in wetlands around the lake. It's not in the water. And it has leaves along the stem. The stem is square, so four sided, and the leaves are opposite or sometimes whorled. And the purple flowers are almost magenta pinky purple. So it's very different. And we do have this dotting shorelines across the state. So just keep an eye on it. If you start to see this, the good thing to do is cut off the flower stalk before it goes to seed and then dig out the rest of the plant. Once it goes to seed, mature purple loosestrife plants can produce up to 2.5 million seeds per plant, and they're the size of pepper grains. So you can picture wind and water and everything spreading these things. So you're going to want to just take care of it right away when you see it. So purple loosestrife on shore and wetlands. And then Phragmites are common reed. This one is a roadside ditch plant. It's a common one at the seacoast where you see it in salt marshes. But because of all of our road salting activities, we're seeing it creeping into lakes and along roadsides near lakes. So the plant's really tall. It has this big brown seed head late in the season. And by really tall, I can tell you that some of the plants that I've seen are 8 to 15 feet tall. They get big. They'll be in roadside areas, wetlands. Leaves are alternate on the stem and they're almost sword like. They're long and sort of broad. And then around lakes, what they do is they start on shore and they'll creep out. They'll send these little rhizomes out, touches down to the lake bottom, it sends up a new plant. So it's like a creeping, marching plant into the lake. I've seen this happen in Lake Pawtuckaway. I've seen it happen over in Grantham. It comes through culverts and it creeps along roadways and then steps into lakes. So when you're on shore or looking around shore, just keep an eye out for something like this. Um, we don't really have any floating leaf plants that I'm concerned about for you guys, so I'm not going to include floating. But underwater plants or submerged plants, this is variable milfoil. This is the one that's in Swains Lake and the one that's really common in your zone of the state or area of the state. So it's variable milfoil and it's going to be variable, unfortunately. It always will have leaves that look like feathers of a bird. So what I mean is it has that midrib with little leaflets coming off to the side, so very feather-like. and it will always have leaves that are whorled around the main stem. And if you look over on the left-hand side of this photo, it's very thick. It looks a lot like if you picture a gray squirrel's tail, big, fluffy, tubular, that's what it looks like in the water. Um, Now, the stem can be red or brown or green. The leaves can be an inch thick wide off the plant, or they can be the diameter of a coffee can. So every lake is a little bit different with growth. So I'm going to show you just a couple of pictures of what it looks like in the water. This one's a really good one to see that sort of squirrel tail lake appearance. The middle of the photo, these are flower stalks coming up in the middle. Over on the bottom left, you can see this little white root that's sticking up off the plant. The plant spreads by fragmentation. So it's going to grow a root, break off, drift, and then root and grow. It's very efficient at doing that. The plants will grow in water from a foot deep to as far down as sunlight can penetrate. I've seen it growing in 30 feet of water. I've seen it growing in one or two and everywhere in between, but it needs sunlight to grow. But usually I see it most often in near shore to 10 feet of water. So that's pretty typical. When it's new, you may have a small little cluster of stems like this with other plants native in the background. So you'll start to see these little weird squirrel's tails coming up. That's what it looks like when it starts to invade a little bit more. So just different shots of it and things to look for the variable. Again, I really think that's your biggest risk and something to look for. The water violet that I mentioned, so I found this in Lake Winnipesaukee in 2020, and I found it in a single cove in Laconia. It's Pickerel Cove. I have no idea how it got there. The only place where this is located in the United States is in a very small private pond in Maine. Oddly enough, it showed up in New Hampshire. It's nowhere around us. None of my colleagues in other states have seen it. Uh, I think New Hampshire right now is the only state that's dealing with it as an invasive, and we are considering it an invasive. So when I first saw it, I've never seen this plant before because it's not common in the United States. I thought it was a milfoil or something because it has a feather-like leaf and it's whirled around the stem, sort of more staggered than whirled. And it had flowers on it that I'd never seen before. And I went to a couple botanists I know, and we finally figured out what it was. And then we were stumped because it was here. But that's what it looks like. Over on the upper right is what it looks like when it starts to break apart midsummer and it all floats up on the surface. And then the thing that really is concerning for me on the bottom right is that the plant will also grow on wet mud, like mud mats next to the lake edge. So, high water, normal water, low water, the plant is very persistent. And that's also going to make it very challenging to manage. We did some research with NC State over the winter for management actions, and this summer, we're actually going to start to manage it in Lake Winnipesaukee. So, since 2020, when I first found it, we've now found it in another cove in Laconia, in a cove in Meredith, and then we also found it at the north end of Lake Opeechee, and then we also found it in Lake Winnisquam. And even though all three of those lakes are connected by surface flow, the plants are growing in places that don't logically receive the flow. So, what I think, and where boaters really don't go, so what I think is that birds are spreading this. Every place where I see it, it's kind of a tucked away backwater wetland, and waterfowl go there, and boaters really don't go there. And I don't think it's fishermen with dirty lines because I don't think fishermen would typically go in these areas. So I think it's waterfowl. So it's just a good one to know what it looks like and to keep an eye out for it. So far, I haven't seen it in other water bodies other than the ones I mentioned, but I wanted you guys to know what it looked like so you could keep an eye out for it. And the other one that I mentioned that I think is a concern for your area is the one that looks like your native waterweed. So if you remember the picture I showed you earlier, we were counting the leaves around the stem. So this is really hard to see because the leaves are kind of packed together and you can't see them very clearly. But this one does have leaves in fours around the main stem. This is a really scrawny picture. This is like a 6-inch plant here. The plant itself can, in ideal conditions, get 25 feet tall. It's a huge grower, and it's one that will really easily take over a water body. So if you start to see your water weed looking funky, and I don't think this is an imminent risk to you, but it's just one to be aware of. Just check your water weed every once in a while and count the leaves. 3 is fine, 4 or more consistently is a concern. It will spread by boats, but this little tuber down here will also be eaten by a waterfowl, and it can spread that way as well. So, waterfowl and boats for this one. And I'm sort of handpicking the ones that I think are a bigger concern for you. Certainly, we have other invasives, and I have recordings of more comprehensive, just invasive presentations on our website that I'll direct you guys to if you want to look at the whole array of things that are out there. I'm just trying to point you and focus you on what to really look for. And then a couple slides on invasive animals. So Asian clam, you guys have a lot of sandy areas in your lake, and Asian clams like sand. So these are about the size of a nickel or a dime, and you can see in the upper left they have a lot of different sizes to them. They can be yellow or brown, almost black, different colors. And these will usually be on the surface of the sandy areas, but they can also dig in. And that's what this is. It's a mesh screening. It's like the kids' little sand toys with the holes in it, a sieve. For some of these, you have to actually sieve the sand and find them, but you'll ultimately see them on the surface too. They are very ridged. So this bottom left photo shows you all the ridges. You can feel those with your finger. So this is definitely an identifying factor. So very ridged, small. And then this is what it looks like on a lake that has a lot of them. This is Ayres Pond in Wyndham. And you can see these are all shells flipped upside down after the clams died and just littering the bottom. And then you can see them here. These are all fish beds, and they're all kind of piled up in the fish beds. So those are just some things to look for on the lake bottom. If you start to see some of those shells, let me know. And then Chinese mystery snail is another animal. This one's big. We have a lot of native snails in our lakes, but you probably don't even know they're there because they're tiny. The Chinese mystery snail is about the size of a golf ball. It's very big. Browner, sometimes greener in color, and very noticeable. So just one to keep an eye out for. You'll easily see them on the lake bottom. And then I do want to point out spiny water flea. I don't think this one's a risk for you guys, but you'll probably be hearing about it in the media. We made an announcement last year that we did find it in New Hampshire, in Lake Winnipesaukee and Lake Winnisquam in August and September last year. It is a risk of spread through fishing activities. So this is a swivel and a fishing line, and you can see all of these stuck to fishing lines. They stick with these little spines that are on their tail. You can see in this right photo. And this is somebody's finger. So you can see it with the naked eye, but they're still fairly small. And this spiny tail is a problem for fish digestion. It can get stuck in the digestive tracts of fish. So spiny water flea is here, as are the other animals that I pointed out. So just yet another thing to look out for. So that's the overview. I am happy to answer questions if you guys have questions. Let me exit out of that. And again, I did record this, so I will share it by YouTube in a couple of days after it processes.
Amy, when you treat for variable milfoil, does it? I mean, it's a herbicide, correct?
Correct.
Does it kill indiscriminately? Is it pretty much wipe out all the plant matter in that area?
So that's a really good question. No, it doesn't. So the herbicides that we use have been really researched well, and aquatic plant control is a function of dose and exposure. So the dose that we use for variable milfoil with the chemical that we use is too low to actually kill off other native plants. So what we see so the product for variable milfoil is called Procelicor. It's a reduced risk herbicide, and it came out in 2016. Well, it came out before 2016. We researched it in 2016, and then we started using it in 2018 in New Hampshire. I like it because it controls variable milfoil really well, and it's gone from the water column in 24 to 48 hours. The products we used to use before lingered for like a month or a month and a half, so this is really quick. And it controls milfoil really well. The only other species that it can hit are lily pads and pad-like species, so the floating heart and stuff like that that I talked about. But those usually rebound by the end of the season because it wasn't a complete hit. They just kind of get a little gnarly looking, but they rebound and they're fine. But yeah, no, it's pretty selective to the milfoil, which is remarkable.
That's your video.
Amy, I was thinking of people that fish and the amount of time that they spend in shallow water fishing. Have you had any luck in integrating some of them, of watching the video, or at least giving them some visual of what to look out for, and then a number to call if they do?
Yeah, so we do a lot of outreach and education of fishing groups. We've made the rounds and given presentations to organized groups. We've also talked to canoe and kayak groups too, AMC and others, and given them information on how to report infestations. So yeah, our approach is the more eyes out there, the better. And it's easy to reach out to groups that are organized like lake associations or bass angler groups, because it's a captive audience and they gather for meetings and stuff like that. The general public that doesn't have any affiliation with any group is the group I worry about the most because it's hard to reach out to them. So that's why I always recommend like kiosks at boat launches and signage at boat launches, lake hosts to do courtesy boat inspections and to let them know what to look for because they're really hard to get to. I worry less about the groups.
Right. I was thinking about, when we have a little paddle boat with a little motor on the back, so we're around the lake a lot. We could, if there was a little pamphlet or something to at least give them a little information, that would be something to hand out. Do you have anything available that would be something we could give to people? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, we've got lots of information cards and pamphlets that I can share with you guys to hand out while you're out and about.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
So this is Ann Lardier talking. Do you have signage that you present or you can give at boat launches that has visuals available?
Yeah, I do. So last year I gave a bunch of signs to the town of Barrington and they put them up at boat launches. I hear there was some vandalism of various kinds, like spray painting or removal or damaging, but I have them. They're free. They're metal signs that are a foot wide and about 2.5 feet tall, so they're sturdy. And they talk about clean, drain, dry. So yeah, I can definitely make some of those available if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone know if the campground has a lake host, or do they check boats before they let people launch them? Nobody knows.
That's a good question. The campground is, and Ron, you can add to this, or Diane, the campground is in transition mode right now. They did have a the NHDES signage at their little boat launch. I don't know if it's still posted. I was sort of hoping maybe one of them would be on the call today, but they're not. So it's a good question. We don't know for sure.
Thank you.
Will you continue?
Ron,
Sorry.
but he's muted.
Oh,
Will I continue what?
to treat Swains Lake, and for how long?
So we're only going to treat if needed. Like I said, I found 2 milfoil plants, and I'm going to probably have divers in next week or the week after. I'll be out to survey the lake again in July, and my plan is to survey a couple times a year, which is normal for lakes that are infested. And I map growth, and then depending on how much I find, I make the call on if they need to treat or if they should have diving done. So they are under my watchful eye and will be for quite some time.
That's great. Thank you.
And Ron, we couldn't hear you when you were talking, so sorry.
You could type in the chat too if you have audio issues.
Amy, can you talk about early, if you find early infestation, oftentimes that can be treated by just divers?
Yeah, yep. So we have contract divers in the state that I have either on retainer or a lake association has on retainer. So if we do find something, we'll send divers in to hand harvest it. And that's why I said it's really important for weed watchers to be out looking where they find things as a couple plants where we can completely get rid of it. Because if it gets too big, then we can't dive and we need to switch to treatment. So it's really nice that we have a couple of options that are size and scale specific so that we can respond appropriately.
And I'm assuming that the diving approach is much less expensive to the state and to the Lake Association than a chemical treatment.
It depends. So I can put cost per acreage on a treatment, which is somewhere between $1,200 and $1,400 per acre. Diving is certainly more expensive per unit area. A diver can charge anywhere from $80 to $100 per hour per diver, and that's nowhere near an acreage estimate. It's just a per hour cost, and it's hundreds of hours to do acres. The next tier up from a basic diver is diver assisted suction harvesting. And that's a mechanical device. If you think of the shows on TV with like the gold sleuthing machines that suck up sediment, our diver assisted suction harvesters have those devices, but they're not sucking sediment. They're diving and hand removing and then sucking what they remove up. That's $1,400 a day. So that's 3 divers, 6 hours a day, and that's not per acre either. So treatment in the long run is cheaper, but diving sometimes on small infestations is more effective. So I'm not going to treat a plant. I'm not going to dive on acres of plants. So it's kind of a sliding scale, and it's a judgment call based on what I see. Diane made a note in the chat that said campground doesn't have a lake host who pays for treatment. If the lake association doesn't have the funding, what happens? So when I was talking to your town administrator a couple weeks ago on the phone, I suggested to him that New Hampshire Lakes is the one that runs the Lake Host program under a grant from DES and other money. They only fund lake hosts at popular boat launches that receive a lot of traffic. So I suggested that because they have lake hosts at Swains Lake, if the town kicked in some money, even though New Hampshire Lakes doesn't cover small, less trafficked boat launches like yours, any offset money that the town can put in could potentially pay for some of the Swains hosts or to train some local hosts on Ayers to do lake hosting at Ayers. The very limited option beyond that is to have the campground do inspections of boats as people bring boats in and put in there. The lake hosting would be more for the public launch. The next part of that is who pays for treatment. So if a new infestation happens to a lake, the state pays for 100%. So in 2023, the state paid 100% of the control efforts at Swains Lake, and that was about $80,000 for that treatment area that I showed you. This year, it's a 50% matching grant with local entities. So whatever the cost is this year, we will provide up to 50% of the cost, and the lake association or the town would provide the other half. Grants aren't always 50%. It depends on how much money I have on the state level to give. Some years we've had 25% grants. Some years, like the last several, we've had 50%. So it's a cost share after that first new infestation. And if the lake association doesn't have money, we try to find other solutions. For diving, we've had some lakes that have had people that are certified scuba divers that volunteer to go get certified to be weed control divers. And they take it on as a labor of love to dive on their lake. So there are no contractor costs involved. And it works on some lakes. Lake Muskoma and Enfield has like 10 divers that just lovingly go out and survey and hand remove all summer long. And it works. They don't have a lot of milfoil left. And there are some other lakes like that. But that's an individual basis that helps cut costs, but not everyone does that or likes to do that. When it comes to herbicide treatment, if there aren't local funds to match, we can't pay for it every year 100%. So some lakes do have to go without. So at the very beginning of the slide of the talk, I said we have about 100 lakes that are infested. We manage about 50 of those because that other 50% just doesn't either have a lake association to help support efforts, or there's really no one on those water bodies. So organized group on those water bodies. So nothing's being done. So that's worst case scenario. Other questions? And if you can't think of any now, you can always reach out to me by email and ask questions anytime.
A couple of things that have occurred to me during the presentation. As you said, Amy, you're always happy to have us take pictures and send them to you. That's been really helpful in the past from my point of view. But secondly, you discourage people from pulling plants themselves, I take it, or at least that's the feedback I've gotten before, that we shouldn't try to do oh, this looks like a bad weed, let's start pulling it out. And anyway, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I will. So it is illegal for anybody to go in and remove anything. And because of where I work, I'm just going to say that even things like raking the lake bottom to remove material, plants, is technically illegal because you're disturbing the lake sediment. People do it everywhere, but technically it's illegal. My concern with going in and removing plants, invasive or otherwise, removing native plants opens up habitat for invasives. Invasives love disturbed areas. So if you've been digging, raking, removing natives, it removes competition and it opens up that habitat. So invasives are going to thrive in those areas. So I would rather see natives left. In terms of removing invasives, I am okay with it if people are weed control diver certified because they've been through a training program that teaches them what to look for and how to remove plants. All too often, and I spend hours, I've spent years on lakes in New Hampshire across the state, and I see people ripping and raking and tugging, and it's not the way to do it. This is not glamorous. I've been elbow deep tracing root systems in lake sediments to pull up milfoil and its complete root system. People aren't going to want to do that unless they have good training and know what they're looking for and know that it's an invasive. It's not pretty, it's not glamorous, it's kind of gross. But not a lot of people are willing to go to that extreme. So that's why we greatly restrict people from managing plants that don't have that training. A lot of times, too, the invasives are growing deeper, and you should be snorkeling or scuba diving, preferably scuba diving, to do it. Because if you go down and you're holding your breath, you may not be down there long enough to do a thorough job. If you yank out the plant, the roots are still there, it's going to regrow. So it's best left done by contractors or people that have gone through a training. So that's how I feel about that one.
Amy, how do you get the training? If you were a certified diver, how do you get the training?
So we have a master dive instructor who teaches it. I think the class is like $180, and it's a specialty certification. So it's like a PADI level recognized course, or NAUI, or whatever the dive specialty is that instructor has. And it's a day of classroom, and it's a day of open water dives in a lake with an invasive. And they teach you hands-on removal techniques, what to do, what not to do, how to notify me and work with me for management. I do the mapping for most lakes. Sometimes volunteers that have been doing this for years go and survey on their own and remove. But it teaches people how to go and do that training, the removal, and you get a certification for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. There are probably a couple hundred people around the state that have certifications for different lakes. And then we have 3 contract diver assisted suction harvesting groups. And then I've got 4 divers who are contractors for hire that just scuba dive. Dan, do you have any wrap ups?
I have no pre-prepared wrap up, but I appreciate your time. It's not quite as I guess as fun as being out on a pontoon boat, but I think the information was probably a little more well, it was very specific, and it was nice having the slides. Sometimes just looking at weeds that you're pulling up from the lake is a little overwhelming, but anyway, this was very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you guys
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Yeah, Amy, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Of course.
We really appreciate it.
Look forward to the YouTube link.
I will fill Dan's email bin, and then I will fill Dan's mail bin, and then I will send the email link as well. And I'm gonna, sorry, Dan, ask you to share with everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thank you
you.
guys.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.